Hello there. Hello, maggots. Hello, maggots. Today, we're going to be talking about the Federal Reserve System. I love talking about I like political systems. If you can't tell, I am a big constitutionalist or studying constitutions around the world. I don't just study the American Constitution. I know a lot about other foreign governments, especially the United Kingdom and other stuff like that. Especially if they speak English, I know a lot about them. Anyway, that's besides the point. We're going to be talking about the Federal Reserve System today. What is the Federal Reserve System? So, I don't have a picture of a Federal Reserve note, but it's a US dollar. Whenever you see a US dollar, it has something written on it called Federal Reserve note. The Federal Reserve System technically makes those Federal Reserve notes, I guess. But the way it's structured is there's 12 banks across the entire United States. For instance, I think I live in District 4. Don't remember which district I live in the Federal Reserve System. District 3, District 4, I don't freaking care. Headquarters, Richmond, Virginia, whatever. In the Federal Reserve System, there are 12 banks. Each bank has 9 people in charge. There's Class A directors, Class B directors, and Class C directors. The Class A directors are directly represent the bank shareholders of each district. But they cannot vote for president. The Class B and C do vote for president. I think the Class C have something more powerful than Class B. I forgot the exact thing they can do that Class B cannot. But basically, Class B and Class C directors can vote for the president. Although, I guess the president's appointable all 9 directors in each Federal Reserve Bank. Now, those 12 presidents will meet up, and they'll have a meeting for a whole week every quarter of the year with the Board of Governors. I don't know if it's a week or a few days. I don't really remember. Board of Governors, are 7 of them. They're mainly appointed by the president, I think, and the Senate. The president and the Senate, president picks the name, senator says, okay, you can put that guy in. No, you can't. Senate's like the thing that says, okay, this guy's qualified, basically. Anyway, there's 7 governors and there's 12 presidents. So what is that, 19 people in the Federal Open Market Committee. Federal Open Market Committee does something very, very important in the United States. It not only regulates some of the inflation, because it kind of does, but the main thing it does is it controls the federal funds rate, which is basically, they do it based on yearly stuff for some reason, but I think they control a daily bond, like an overnight bond. It's weird. So if a bank holds a bond right now, it's 3.6%, I think. But if they hold it longer, I still think it's 3.6%. If it's 15 days, I don't actually know. It's the cost of borrowing money between banks. That's what the federal funds rate is, it looks like to me. Anyway, that's very, very important to the bond market, to the stock market, to everything. Now, I argue that that's not a very stable way to run a currency, right? They don't control inflation because every time they lower rates, it increases inflation because people will obviously want to borrow money during good times when there's low rates. And then whenever there's high rates, no one's really borrowing that much money, but the amount of interest that bond's creating is creating more money in the market. So regardless of what you do, you're most likely going to create inflation a little bit. You know what I mean? A little bit, not entirely. But I argue that we need a K% rule. K% rule was a thing that Milton Friedman advocated for. Now, I don't know if he made up this rule, but I do like it. It's a 3 or 2% rule on all money. And that 3 to 2% rule, basically, you look at the total money supply and you say, okay, we're just going to increase it by 3% every year. So by the end of the year, the money supply should be 103%, right? It should never go over that 3% rule. I actually am in total agreement with it. So I argue that we need I would love for Congress to make this, right? Congress has the entire authority to restructure the Federal Reserve System, to tell them not to do, to tell them how to regulate the bond market and the inflation rate. I would totally put Milton Friedman's rule in there. I would also force him not to buy government-backed bonds, but it would make bonds, I think it would make bonds cheaper. I'm not 100% certain. But what they do, they do something called quantitative easing, where they buy bonds from the federal government because no one's willing to buy that many bonds. So whenever we spend money, we're borrowing money on ourselves by the Federal Reserve System. The Federal Reserve System has to collect interest from the government. Federal Reserve System is technically a private entity that's appointed by the president. At least the 7 governors, anyway. Out of those 19 people, 7 of them are the governors in Washington, D.C. We all know it. We gotta stop lying to ourselves. But anyway, it just seems to me that our Federal Reserve System, I do like the way it's set up. It's very decentralized. I love how Missouri somehow gets 2 banks and every other state is Missouri has 2 headquartered banks, which is ridiculous, but Missouri is a very diversified economy, so that probably makes sense. But there's 12 banks in the entire United States. Missouri, and the only reason that Missouri has 2 banks, and this is what I read, is the senator would not agree with the Federal Reserve System if Missouri didn't get the power to have 2 Federal Reserve centralized banks, which is kind of funny. Obviously, it looks a bit old. If you look at the map of the Federal Reserve System, the western side of the country is freaking huge. The eastern side of the country is really not that big. It's the same thing with the district courts of appeals in the judicial branch. The map is a little crazy, but I do love the Federal Reserve System trying to mix it with private and public. I think the government has done a decent job at separating them out a little bit. Although the average American is just going to be like, why are they involved? Why is a private entity involved in printing money? It's kind of weird. They're not really private, they're really public, but whatever. I don't even think their salaries are... Maybe Congress puts the salaries in, but for the governors, I'm not sure about the president, so, but... Yeah, it's crazy to me that, Oh, and the New York City... So there's 12 banks in total, right? Not all the banks get a vote, though. Some of them just voice their opinion in the meeting, so they don't get a vote. Only 5 of them actually get a vote, I think. I think it's only 5. I know New York gets permanent status, voting status, because they own... I think they have 30% of the banks in the entire United States are headquartered in New York. In the New York district for the Federal Reserve System. The other 11, like even my district, sometimes we don't get voting rights that year. It sucks for us, but we're not New York City, so... New York State gets the most power, although I would argue that Missouri is almost always on the rotation because, again, they got 2 Federal Reserve banks. I don't know. It's kind of interesting how the way it's set up. Most Americans would absolutely disagree that one state should have 2 centralized banks, but whatever. Nobody cares. Nobody complains about it. It's not a big deal. But that being said... So 5 of them, I think, can vote, and the other 7 can't. I think it rotates, because there's 12 people voting, yeah. So 4 of them are voting. New York always gets a vote, so it's 5 people in total, and then the 7 governors. So there's 12 people in total that are in charge of the rates. Now, here's what I would do if I was Congress. Again, I probably should have mentioned this earlier, but I would make rates 5 to 10%. What does that do? Why would you make rates permanently at 5 to 10%? Well, it enforces people to actually save their money. It enforces people to save their money, but it also forces them, if they're going to borrow money, they have to be very, very responsible for it, right? And it would probably crush the student loan market, and it would probably force the government to think about borrowing money for student loans. We should not be enslaving the taxpayer for a bunch of useless college degrees. It just doesn't make sense. But if we had that rule in there, I bet you the government would think long and hard paying 5% for freaking, or giving people 5% loans out to people. Maybe they wouldn't. Maybe they'd like, oh, I love the idea of charging someone 5% for student loans. It'd be hard. But small businesses that are very successful could obviously thrive in that environment, but the ones that don't know how to make any money, sadly, it's going to create a hierarchy. It's really, really hard to... It's going to be a little more cutthroat, but I argue that it would actually be more responsible than having the low-rate environment we have now. 3.6% still not good enough, in my opinion. And we definitely need to think about I think even 4 to 5% rates. But I think if we added the K% rule, because I think the biggest problem is the rates just sort of are free. They make the rate and it's free floating, so banks can do whatever they want with that rate. But that creates inflation. So you actually should regulate the percentage of the amount of money in the market. I don't know how you would do that with a federal funds rate. That would be kind of difficult. But I looked it up, and it does look like it would actually work, and it would be more stable than what we have now. Our currency could last for another 100 years. The US dollar could last for, instead of 100 years, it could last 200 years if you add my rules in. Right? The US dollar still is not going to last forever. But theoretically, if you added my rules, the K% rule with the 5% minimum and 10% maximum, the Federal Reserve System, I still want it to be flexible when it comes to bond rates. And somehow they're only able to make 3% for that whole year. So if the bonds, I guess, borrow from the Federal Reserve System, you can't borrow any more during that year if it maxes up to 3%. I don't know how you would enforce it. I don't even know if it's even possible, but I really love a K% rule for the money supply, and I really because most centralized banks do control interest rates, and there's not really been a central bank that doesn't do it, I don't think. So I think it's a really bad idea to experiment on something that we don't know if it works or not. I know that most central banks, I think, have a K% rule, or at least have something similar. Like, I know that Singapore does a broadband currency one, which I kind of like. I think maybe broad-based currency would be kind of cool. It's like a Band-Aid, sort of, where they put all the baskets of currency together and they value it against their own currency, Singapore dollar. That's kind of freaking cool. I'm not sure about Switzerland. I'm not entirely sure, but it's extremely low inflation rate. But it might be a bad thing. I don't know. So yeah, I mean, you kind of want a little bit of inflation because you want to incentivize people to spend money, but you also want to make sure people save money, which is why you want to do a K% rule for people that are just having money in their checking account and they need to spend money and whatnot, and then people who are saving money in their savings account will benefit too. That's really the ideal here. I want the acceleration of money to happen. At the same time, I want people to save, but I don't know if you could do one or the other. Also, I hate our dual mandate for our Federal Reserve System. Federal Reserve System should not worry about employment at all. The employment market will probably solve itself out if employers want to hire people. I'm sorry, I'm not a big fan of lowering employment or hiring employment for the sake of, risking inflation. Risking inflation to lower employment is ridiculous. That doesn't make a whole lot of sense. Stable currency should be the number one important thing in a Federal Reserve System. We should not have the dual mandate. We would get rid of that. That should be up to the Bureau of Labor Statistics somehow do that. I don't know how they would do it, but they should calculate, okay, here's degrees we do. We're borrowing all the student loans on these degrees. We're not doing we're not doing liberal arts degrees. We're not doing teaching degrees. Teaching doesn't have a return on investment, at least not in the first 5 years. It's not worth spending that much money for the first 5 years of teaching. It's just not. And we need to actually get rid of some of the student loans. Not all of them. I'm okay with nursing. I'm okay with dental hygiene. But the jobs that don't have a return on investment, why are we doing them? Don't have an art degree be funded by taxpayers. I'm sorry. A tax-funded student loan should not exist. Okay, right now, I think the student loan market's like $1.5 trillion, right? I don't remember the exact amount that people are borrowing for student loans. It's absolutely freaking ridiculous. They're not little highway robbers, they're big highway robbers. These people that are taking out the student loans are absolutely greedy pigs, and we need, they're not as bad as the banker scum back in 2008 when the housing market crashed. They got a bailout too. But I don't want either of them to have a bailout. I think we should treat everyone equally. But you know what? We did it to the bankers. I guess it's okay to do it to the people who are stealing almost $2 trillion of freaking taxpayer money. I don't know. Obviously, not every person that's borrowing money is going to be asking money from the taxpayer or tax relief. It's a little ridiculous. But I don't know. If you, at least you paid on your principal and some of the interest, I actually accept the idea of giving you relief. I do think you were grifted out of money because you got a terrible degree. Really, it's the degree that's the most important thing, and people just don't understand. I had the worst guidance counselor. He just said go to college. He never said which degree I should take. No, none of these guidance counselors have any incentive to actually, because like if they were actually paid on results, right, on what happens to these kids. Guidance counselors were actually, instead of being spineless, if they were paid on how much return on investment the actual education they're telling kids to get, that's what they should be paid on. I don't understand it. Teachers, same thing. If you teach kids, teach, master's degree, no employment. Oh, I need it. More education. It's a hamster wheel. It just keeps going. And there's no job at the end of it. You shouldn't get paid at all, in my opinion. It's dumb. The entire thing's a scam. Yeah, you're gonna be knowledgeable and educated or whatnot. Some of these kids are not, and they have a bachelor's degree. Like someone asked, "Where's this country at?" And the bachelor's people with bachelor's degree don't know geography that much, maybe, but maybe you would think they would be knowledgeable, but they have a master's degree in whatever study they have. Oop. And you would think that a person with a bachelor's degree would know where Iran is. You put it on a map. No, they don't know. So it's just to me that we need our Federal Reserve System. We need to fix our education system first before we fix the Federal Reserve System. But in my opinion, if we do this correctly, we can have a stable U.S. dollar for the next 200 years. Inflation should not be at 3.6%. I'm sorry. That's way too high. If you did that for the next 100 years, the U.S. dollar's value is going to be so low that it's going to be absolutely insane. We're already paying, I think when I first started driving, I paid $2 a gallon for gas. Now it's $4 a gallon for gas in some places. That's not a stable environment. Because everything's reliant on the price of gas. So we really need to actually think about how to control our currency and the manipulation. We need to really make it punishable for the Federal Reserve to really act fast, Obviously they do act slow because they don't want to piss off everyone. But at the same time, I think we should strip them of a dual mandate, just do a single mandate, currency stability, and very, very stable interest rates that are really high, because I don't want banks borrowing that much money either. I don't trust the banks. I'm okay with keeping the Federal Reserve System. I disagree with Milton Friedman on automating it, but he believes that humans are corrupt and they can lead to terrible decision making. I think it's okay to have some experts in the room, especially 19 experts. I think that's fine. I disagree with Milton a little bit on that, but other than that, Milton Friedman's amazing. I love his negative income tax thing. We'll talk more about that kind of stuff too. How to reform welfare. I'll absolutely make a video on that. Reforming welfare is absolutely. Anyway, maggots, hopefully you enjoyed my 2 things I would do for Federal Reserve: 3% K% rule, and 5 to 10%. Controlling the federal funds rate. Hopefully you enjoyed this. By the way, it's Open Market Committee. That's the name of the 19 people. Open Market Committee. And 12 of them have votes, 5 of them don't, or 7 of them, I don't remember. It doesn't matter. Some of the people in the 12 banks do, some of them don't. It doesn't really matter. You can look it up later. Anyway, goodbye.